Also, I want to show you what's been marked as S9O in evidence. Recognize that?
Yes,
And what is it?
it's my voucher that I submitted, filled out.
Okay, and the information that says to be completed by officer requesting off-duty employment pay. There's that top section. Is
Yes,
that your handwriting there?
yes.
Judge, I'm going to forego asking specific questions. Is that all that handwriting there yours?
Besides the,
Well, no, just on the top section
yes,
first.
that is all mine.
Okay, and then there's an officer's signature. Is that yours?
Yes,
And June 6, 2014, is that your handwriting?
yes.
Okay. Now, there's also a specific line for detailed project name. What do you identify? Is that your handwriting?
Yes.
And what do you identify that particular project as?
It says, I have it as NJDOT Pulaski Skyway.
Okay, and then there's a specific indication of location.
I have 18th and Marin Boulevard.
Okay, based upon your understanding of what was required to get paid, were you required to fill in the detailed project name and location?
Yes,
And you know why you were required to put that information there?
so they know specifically what post I worked.
What post you were? Okay. And is that, to your recollection, 18th to Marin, is that a one-man post or a two-man post?
It's hard to say at that time because the posts varied. Sometimes a two-man post became a one-man post. So I don't remember at that specific time if that was a one-man post or a two-man post.
Still looking for S9W, we haven't found that yet, huh? All right. Well, I'm going to show you what's been marked as S9N for identification and ask you to take a look at that and then ask you to whether that refreshes your recollection about on that day whether it was a one-man post or a two-man post.
Yeah, at this day, it would be a two-man post.
Okay, so 18th and again, Judge, I had shown S9N. What is S9N?
It's Carlos Castillo's off-duty payment voucher,
Okay. Do you know Carlos Castillo?
just from work.
Yeah. Okay, do you know him from work?
Yeah,
Do you have an independent recollection of ever working a DOT detail post with him?
no,
Okay. Based upon your, do you have an independent recollection of working June 6th of 2014?
no,
Okay. Is that your paperwork?
yes,
Did you fill that out?
yes.
Based upon that paperwork, where were you on June 6, 2014, between 6 and 10 o'clock?
I was working this detail.
What detail?
The 18th and Marin Boulevard Skyway detail.
Okay. And so, is that a fixed post?
I believe so at that time, yes, it was a fixed post.
Okay. When you say at that time, that's it, did it ever change?
Correct, they took it away. They eliminated that post.
Oh, 18th of Marin doesn't exist anymore?
No,
Okay. But was it, when it existed, was it always considered a fixed post?
yes.
And what is a fixed post?
It was a steady post that you needed I would consider that you knew it needed to be manned basically every day.
Okay. And when you manned that post, what did you do?
I would control traffic, cross pedestrians, and it's basically maintain traffic flow.
Okay. And there's is there a supervisor's signature on that?
Yes,
Okay. Do you recognize that signature?
yes.
And whose signature is that?
It's Deputy Chief Donnelly's.
And at the time, it was Lieutenant Don?
Correct.
All right. Do you have an independent recollection of being supervised on a DOT post by Lieutenant Don?
Not at that specific date.
No, I'm asking you ever. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Remember him being a supervisor?
Yes.
for you? No, you
Yes.
don't remember that day, you said,
No.
right? Okay. I want to show you what's been marked as S9W. Have you ever seen that before?
No.
Next date I'll go through is your group of documents identified as S4, specifically S4J. Show you what's been marked as S4J for identification. What is that?
It's my off-duty payment voucher.
Okay, and is that your handwriting?
Yes,
On the section to be completed by officer requesting off-duty employment pay.
that's correct.
All right. And is that your signature?
Yes,
And do you have an independent recollection of working on May 29th, 2014?
no.
Okay. Did you fill out that paperwork?
Yes, I do.
All right. Now, with respect to the detailed project name, what did you fill out? That is your writing?
Yes, that is
What did you
correct.
fill out?
I wrote NJDOT Skyway,
Okay, and why would you, again, put that there?
because that was the specific job that we knew it as, the Skyway detail.
Okay. And the location, did you write a location there?
Yes, I wrote 1 and 9 and Broadway.
All right. And to your knowledge, is 1 and 9, and was not 1 and 9 at Broadway a fixed DOT post?
Yes,
Okay. Did you work 1 and 9 at Broadway more than once?
yes,
Okay. Do you recall what you said you worked often?
yes.
What post did you work most? That you can recall?
I worked pretty much anything that was available, so there was no specific post that I could say I worked this post on a daily basis.
So any DOT post that was available, you would work?
Yes,
Okay. And what was the rate of pay for that?
it was $50 an hour.
And again, I know you said you don't have an independent recollection of May 29th of 2014.
Yes.
So based upon your review of that paperwork, where were you from 6 to 10 on May 29th, 2014?
I was working the 1 and 9 Broadway Skyway detail.
And specifically at 1 and 9 at Broadway?
Yes,
And does that pay voucher have a supervisor's signature on it?
yes,
And do you recognize that signature?
yeah.
Who is that?
It says Dylan.
Do you know Dylan?
I know, yes, I do.
Okay, and who's Dylan?
I'm not sure at the time what was the rank, what the
Does it have to be a
supervisor.
supervisor, right?
Yes,
All right. And do you know what his rank is now?
no,
Okay. Do you have a specific recollection, not on this particular day, but ever having been supervised by Supervisor Dillon?
yes.
Next document is S11F relating to June 10th of 2014. Show you what the mark is, S11F. You recognize that?
Yes,
Is that your writing?
yes,
And I'm going to skip right, the entire top section is yours. Is that correct?
correct.
The signature's yours?
Yes,
And the date is what?
it's going to be June 10th, 2014.
Okay, and the detailed project name, did you write that in?
Yes,
And what did you write in?
NJDOT Pulaski Skyway.
Okay, and there's a location there?
Yes,
And what is the location?
18th and Marion.
So at least from the documents we've seen, that's the second time you worked 18th of Marion?
Yes,
All right. And is there a supervisor's signature there?
yes.
And whose signature is that?
Sergeant Joe Santiago.
Do you know Sergeant Joe Santiago?
Yes,
How well do you know Sergeant Joe Santiago?
I know him well.
Okay. Do you have an independent recollection of ever being supervised by Sergeant Santiago on a DOT detail?
Yes,
Okay. And do you recall this particular day?
no,
Finally, I'm going to show you S17I in evidence relating to the July 1st of 2014 date. S17I, Your Honor. July 1st of 2014. show you what's been marked as S17I. Any questions with respect to the top section?
Yes,
It's all yours?
correct.
Signature?
Yes,
And what's the date?
July 1st, 2014.
Now, with respect to the detailed project name, what did you write in?
NJDOT Pulaski Skyway.
Is that the same as the other ones?
Yes,
And for the location, what location is it?
18th and Marin Boulevard.
Okay, it's a good post for you, huh?
Yeah,
Okay. And is there a supervisor's signature on that?
yes,
And what is the, do you recognize that name?
yeah, Sergeant Edward Nestor.
Okay, do you know Sergeant Edward Nestor?
Yeah,
Presently, is he still a sergeant?
no,
What is he now?
believe it, Captain.
Okay. And do you have a independent recollection, not on that particular day, of being supervised by Sergeant, now Captain Edward Nestor, for a DOT detail?
That specific day, no, but yes, he's supervised me on details.
And now, do you have an independent recollection of working July 1st of 2014?
No,
Based upon this paperwork, where were you on July 1st, 2014, from 6 to 10?
working DOT post at 18th and Marin.
Okay, Officer Zambrzycki, have you ever submitted a pay voucher for an off-duty detail that you didn't, for payment that you didn't work?
Never.
That's your voucher from September 25th, 2014, correct?
That's correct.
And that's your signature on the voucher?
Yes,
And you filled out all of the information but for the signature in the foreman authorized agent section,
that's
correct?
correct.
And according to your voucher on September the 25th, what shift did you work? How much time did you put in?
8 hours.
That was from 8 to 6.
Yeah, 8 a.m. to 1600 hours.
The location that you put in on that voucher was 139 in Palisade Avenue, correct?
That's correct.
Do you see the signature on that voucher?
Yes.
And do you recognize that signature?
No.
Okay. It appears to me to read P.O. Romanelli. Would you agree?
I could see that.
Okay. Was police officer Romanelli supervisor on off-duty jobs?
No.
He was a desk boss.
He was the officer who gave out the jobs.
He was the pick master.
Correct.
And he was the pick master for which district?
The North District.
The North District. So, do you have any independent recollection of this particular day as you sit here today?
No.
But based upon the voucher, it appears that it was signed by Police Officer Romanelli, correct?
That's correct.
So that would be inconsistent with the procedure of having a supervisor sign it at your post, correct?
Correct.
But consistent with your understanding of the procedure, which did allow other officers who weren't booking you to sign your voucher under certain circumstances. Bless you.
Can you repeat that question? I'm
Yes. So you testified earlier that there were some circumstances where your voucher could be signed by someone other than the supervisor who booked you that day.
sorry. That's correct.
And this would be an example of that.
Correct.
Now, yesterday, just at the conclusion of your testimony, you were asked by Mr. Stoma whether or not you had ever gotten paid for a job that you didn't work. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you answered that you never got paid for a job that you didn't work.
That's correct.
And for purposes of my questioning, I certainly don't take any issue with that. And I want to show you a few exhibits. First page in that document. That is your off-duty pay voucher for June 26, 2014, correct?
Yes.
and it's for the shift from 6 to 10 a.m., right?
That's correct.
And is that your signature on the voucher?
Yes, it is.
And you filled in the part below that. You listed the detailed project name as NJDOT Pulaski Skyway, correct?
Yes.
And the location that you were working that day was 18th and Marin Boulevard,
That's
correct?
Yes.
Now, there is no signature on that voucher, correct, officer?
That's correct.
Now, I'd like you to take a look at the last page of that exhibit. The very top line has your name, correct?
Yes.
And the date is June 26, 2014, which corresponds to the date on your voucher, correct?
Yes.
And it indicates that you were paid for 4 hours of work in the amount of $200 an hour, correct?
$200 for the day.
I'm sorry, $200 for the day, right?
Yes.
And the vendor in that case is New Jersey DOT Pulaski Skyway, would correspond with your voucher, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you worked the 18th and Marin Boulevard post that day, we agree,
Yes.
and you submitted the voucher unsigned, correct?
That's correct.
And you got paid for that.
That's correct.
Take a look now at the second page. That's what we're referring to as a master sheet. Have you seen one of those before?
No.
If you look at the section for the North District, the top third of the page,
Yes.
and the date on that master sheet is June 26, 2014, and corresponds with your voucher, right?
Yes.
And for the post that you were working that day, which was 18th and Marin, there are no names next to those two posts on the master sheet, correct?
Yes.
So, according to the master sheet, there's no indication that you worked that day, correct?
That's correct.
And nor is there a supervisor listed next to your name, correct?
That's correct.
So it's possible that the supervisor may not have known you were there to sign your voucher, correct?
Object to what's possibly wrote.
Well, the master sheet itself indicates that there's no supervisor, correct?
Yes.
And there's no supervisor who signed your voucher, correct?
That's correct.
And you testified earlier that there were occasions where you'd be at a post and a supervisor never came by to sign your voucher, correct?
Yes.
So we have a situation here where you have an unsigned voucher
Yes.
and the master indicates that you didn't work that day, correct?
Correct.
But according to your testimony, which I take no issue with, you remember never working a job or never being paid for a job that you didn't work.
That's correct.
You ready?
Yes.
The first page again is your voucher, and that's for July the 16th of 2014, correct?
Yes.
And the shift that you worked that day was the 6 to 10 shift,
Yes.
and that's your signature on the voucher, right?
Yes.
Now, the location that you worked on that day was Sip Avenue and 1 and 9, correct?
Yes.
And on this voucher, there is no signature for a supervisor, correct?
That's correct.
Now, if you go to the very last page of that exhibit, the fourth line down,
Yes.
again, the date there corresponds with your voucher and indicates that you were paid for 4 hours on July 16th in the total amount of $200 for the New Jersey DOT Pulaski Skyway vendor, correct?
That's correct.
So you would agree that you got paid for working the Sip Avenue and 1 and 9 post that day,
Yes.
which you did in fact work.
Yes.
Take a look at the next page, which is the master sheet. That master sheet is dated July 16th, 2014, which corresponds to the date on your voucher, correct?
Yes.
And if you take a look at the North District Court portion of the master sheet for the 6 to 10 a.m. sheet to ship, you'll see Skyway 10 and Skyway 11, or for 1 and 9 and SIP. Do you see that?
Yes.
And there's no officer listed for either of those posts, correct?
Correct.
Certainly your name is not anywhere in the North District, correct?
No.
And the supervisor for the 1 and 9 and SIP posts is listed to be Sergeant McVicker, correct?
Yes.
Do you know Sergeant McVicker?
Yes.
So if the procedure went as you would have expected, it would have been Sergeant McVicker who would have signed your voucher.
Yes.
Now, take a look at the page of the exhibit that's entitled Supervisor's Off-Duty Activity Sheet. Are you with me?
Yes.
Now, the name printed on that is Sergeant Thomas McVicker, correct?
That's correct.
And he would have been your supervisor on July 16th, 2014, which is the date of this supervisor's activity sheet, correct?
Yes.
Have you ever seen one of these sheets before?
No.
I want to go over some of the information in it with you and compare it to the master log. So on the first line, Sergeant McVicker indicates that, or writes in his log, that at 7:15 a.m. he has Sergeant Griffin booked at 18th and Marin. You see that?
Yes.
And if you look at the master, that's consistent, correct?
Yes.
And the next entry on the supervisor's log is for 7:15, and that's for Police Officer Vargas at 18th and Marin, correct?
Yes.
And he actually makes a note that he was at that location and the officer was not present. See that?
Yes, sir.
And Vargas was actually listed on the master as being at 18th and Marin, wasn't he?
Yes.
The next entry is for 7:46, Police Officer Timmons at 139 in Tunnelly, correct?
Correct.
And Timmons is on the master also for that location, correct?
That's correct.
And the next entry for 139 in Tunnelly at 7:46 is for Detective Morawski. You see that?
Yes.
Now, the master indicates that that post was to be covered by, looks like Officer Robertson.
Correct.
So it's fair to say that Detective Borowski may have picked up that post in his place, correct?
Yes.
The next entry is for Officer Kaminsky at 7:52 and for Officer Knowles at 7:52 at 1 and 9 in Broadway. And for 1 and 9 in Broadway, we have Kaminsky and Knowles on the master, correct?
That's correct.
And Sergeant McVicker's supervisor sheet then has Officer Hill and Officer Encarnacion, I believe, at 1 and 9 in Newark, which is also consistent with the master, correct?
Yes.
Now, your name doesn't appear anywhere on Sergeant McVicker's supervisor's off-duty activity sheet, does it?
No, it does not.
So, we know that you worked that day.
Yes.
The master doesn't list you as working, correct?
Correct.
The patrol log doesn't list you as working, correct?
Correct.
So, your voucher was correct, but the master and the supervisor sheet were incorrect. Is that right?
it doesn't have me listed on here.
Right. But you were there, and you know you were there,
Yes, absolutely.
because you worked every single job that you put in for.
Yes,
And D64 is your voucher
yes,
for July 16, 2014, correct?
correct.
Now, that's the very same date as the voucher that's in D63, correct?
Yes,
The only difference is that in D64, the shift that you worked was for the 3 to 7 shift, correct?
that's correct.
So you, on July 16th, just so we're clear, you worked the morning shift and then you picked up the afternoon shift,
That's
correct?
correct.
Now, that is your signature on that voucher, correct?
Yes,
And you put for the detail project name NJDOT Skyway, right?
yes,
And the location is 18th and Marin Boulevard, correct?
correct.
And like the morning shift, there is no signature from a supervisor on your voucher, correct?
That's correct.
But you did work that, we know that, correct?
Yes,
And in fact, if you go to the last page of the exhibit, the 5th line down is another entry for 7/16/2014 in your name for the NJDOT Pulaski Skyway project that indicates you worked 4 hours and you got paid $200, correct?
yes,
So this voucher, you, after you completed working your shift that day, you submitted and you got paid for it, right?
yes,
Now let's take a look at the master list, which is on the next page. That master is dated July 16th, which corresponds with your voucher, correct?
yes,
And for the 3 to 7 shift at 18th and Marin, it's a 2-man post, correct?
yes,
And according to the master, one of the posts is open, there's no officer listed to take that post, correct?
that's correct.
But in the second 18th and Marin entry, it was supposed to, according to the master, be manned by Officer Griffin, correct?
Yes,
And the supervisor, your supervisor that day, according to the master, was Sergeant Cahill, is that right?
that's correct.
So Sergeant Cahill, you would have thought him being your supervisor that day would have been the one to sign your voucher if the procedure was followed.
Yes,
Now, take a look at the supervisor's off-duty activity sheet that's in that exhibit. And I might refer to it sometimes as the patrol log, so I'm sorry if I confuse you with that. Are you with me?
yes,
Okay. So the patrol log in that exhibit is dated July 16th, which corresponds to the master and which corresponds to the voucher, right?
yes,
And the name on the patrol log is Brian Cahill, correct?
that's correct.
That corresponds with the supervisor on the master, correct?
Yes,
Now, Cahill, in lines 2 and 3 of the master, lists, I'm sorry, in the patrol log, in lines 2 and 3 of the patrol log, lists both posts at 18th and Marin Boulevard as open, correct?
that's correct.
Now, we know that's wrong because you worked that post that day, correct?
That's correct.
And we know that the master is wrong because you worked that post that day, correct?
Yes,
For both of those shifts, the morning shift and the master shift, on the afternoon shift, you would agree that if you were to just look at the master sheet and the associated patrol logs, it would look like you didn't work.
that's correct.
But you in fact did work.
Yes, I did.
So it's your vouchers that are correct, and it's the master sheets and the patrol logs that are incorrect.
Correct.
Are you aware, officer, that just about all of the dates for which my client Joe Ascalise is charged, he is accused of signing someone's voucher?
Objection, Judge. This question can't possibly be answered by Mr. Zambrzycki with respect to, Officer Zambrzycki with respect to knowledge about the basis for the charge against Mr. Ascalise.
You can answer the question if he doesn't know.
I don't know what the question is.
Judge, the question is he asking him whether he's familiar with the basis for the charges against Mr. Ascalise.
Okay.
He's asking him to testify with...
Well, is that what you asked, whether he's familiar with the charges?
I didn't even finish my question, Judge.
I know, that's why I don't know what the, this is what's gonna happen, let him finish his question, don't answer the question, okay, officer?
Yes,
I'll wait to hear your objection, okay?
Thank you. So, officer, are you aware that my client, Joe Ascalise, is charged with signing the voucher or vouchers of other officers who, just like you, didn't appear on the master and didn't appear on the patrol logs for those days?
Objection again, Judge.
Did you?
That's
is
my
he
question,
aware-
Judge.
That was your question, and your objection is,
My
it's
objection
not
is that-
relevant that he's aware?
It's not relevant as to whether he's aware of what the basis of the charges are, and it's certainly, there's no foundation for whether he has any knowledge of what the charges are. Officer Zambrzycki is testifying to what his experiences were, what his paperwork is, and he's asking him to, in essence, give an opinion with respect to how it compares to the charges against. This is a legal argument, Judge. This is summation argument. This is...
I'm gonna sustain the objection unless there's a tie-in somewhere later on.
No problem.
Thank you.
The paperwork that we went over today, officer, was any of that paperwork shown to you by Detective Signorelli or Detective Josper?
No.
Did anybody discuss with you, anybody else from the prosecutor's office discuss with you the paperwork that I went over with you?
No.
Are you aware of whether or not the prosecutor's office or the Jersey City Police Department ever contacted you in connection with an investigation regarding your paperwork?
No.
They did not, correct?
No.
Officer, thank you for coming in today. I don't have any more questions.
Any other cross?
I just have a couple questions.
Sure.
Officer, just a couple questions about the exhibits you were just shown.
Yes.
The vouchers that weren't signed by a supervisor.
Correct.
Was it your understanding, strike that, you clearly submitted those vouchers without supervisor signatures to the Office of Off-Duty Employment to get paid, correct?
Yes.
And that's because you worked those particular days,
That's
correct?
correct.
Was it your understanding that, your understanding of the system in place, that you could submit a voucher if the supervisor didn't come by on the post that you were working, you could submit it for payment even without that supervisor's signature?
Yes.
That's all I have, thank you.
Nothing.
All right. Any new direct?
But yes, Judge, briefly. You had, with respect to the DOT Skyway detail, working the DOT Skyway detail, you were asked about the procedures in place regarding supervision. Is that correct?
Yes.
Explain what you would do if, in fact, a supervisor didn't show up.
See, I don't know if I'm going to be confusing time periods.
Specifically with respect to, let me be clear, let's refer to time periods you requested, July 16th, June 26th, and September 25th of 2014. Those are the dates on the exhibits that you were just questioned about with respect to your pay vouchers. And I'm going to ask you to limit it to the 3 pay vouchers that have been introduced where you don't have supervisor signatures. That time period is from, it's 2 dates on July 16th and one on June 26, 2014. In that time period, what was your process in terms of submitting your paperwork for payment?
I would say probably if I had no supervisor, I would reach out over on the air and ask for one to respond, to ask if there's a supervisor assigned to the post, and if no one responded, I would just submit the voucher.
Okay, and then how would you go about submitting that voucher?
I would just respond back to the North District and drop it off in there's a box where you submit the vouchers.
Okay. And are you responsible for processing those pay vouchers when the officer walks off to the employee?
No.
Okay. Once you submit those vouchers, what's the next step for you in terms of whether you're going to get paid or not?
Then I would just review my paycheck and see if I got paid. And if I didn't, I would notify the pickmaster to see if there was an issue.
And who was your pickmaster
Officer John Romanell
at the time?
at the time.
All right. Now, you were questioned with respect to D61, the September 25th, 2014 pay voucher?
What date?
D61, Your Honor.
September 20th.
Yes.
Okay. You indicated, do you recognize that signature as Romanello?
It looks like Romanell's signature.
Do you have a recollection of having Romanello sign one of your pay vouchers?
No.
Do you have a recollection of working, well, let me ask you this question with respect to D61. It says, for the detailed project name, is that your handwriting?
Yes.
And what is your writing?
NJDOT Route 139.
Okay, and for the location?
139 Palisade Avenue.
And how many hours is that?
8 hours.
What does that tell you about this particular detail?
That's a 8-hour detail.
Okay, and with the Skyway detail, the Skyway off-duty detail, fixed post traffic posts, were they different from the Route 139 and Palisade Avenue Skyway posts?
Yes.
Explain how they were different.
They were 4-hour details, and I believe from 6 to 10, and then 3 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Which ones were 4-hour details?
The Skyway details.
And what was the Route 139,
It
which has
was-
been referred to as the construction 2 other different occasions here? What were the hours for those posts?
Those were 8-hour posts. Eight.
And I noticed that you write for the detail project on D61, you identified as NJDOT Route 139. And then for the other ones, you write NJDOT Skyway, and Pulaski Skyway. What is the difference?
I think it was just easier for the office to distinguish what job they would get that I would be paid from.
So those jobs are different.
Yes.
Okay. And were they different with respect to how they were supervised as well?
No.
Okay. How was the Route 139, the NJDOT Route 139 8-hour details?
It was supervised in the same manner. Officer would respond, sergeant would, or supervisor would respond to location.
Okay. And again, as far as D61, do you have any recollection of why was Romanello, he was an officer, is that correct?
That's correct.
And is he still a pickmaster?
To my recollection, yes.
Okay. And do you recall him ever actually being a supervisor?
No.
Do you have any recollection of why you got a signature from him?
No.
And you submitted that for payment, and you indicated that you were paid for that?
Yes.
How many details would you say you worked? The Skyway DOT details, let's say between the period of April and September 25th, 2014.
I don't know, maybe like 30, 40 of them.
out of those 30 to 40 details, can you estimate how many times do you recall a supervisor, a DOT supervisor, a Jersey City police supervisor working the DOT detail did not sign your voucher?
That I can't recall.
Judge, I have no further questions for Mr. Ross's Zambrzycki.
Any redirect?
No redirect.